Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with another week of World War II, number 50, August 10th, 1940. Haile Mussolini, Haile Selassie's usurper, war in Somaliland. Yep, that's the title. I don't know what else to say. I don't know how to do intros. But no one's got advice for intros. Leave it in the comments. What should I say? Should I just not say anything and just start the video, just stare at you, and then just press the button and be like, whoa, now it's playing, and then start the reactions? I don't know. Anyways,
What do you mean no one cares? It is important.
I care. I care, Indy.
August 10th, 1940. The fighting between the European nations has mostly been in mainland Europe so far this war. But this week that changes. This week a British colony is invaded.
Oh no, not the British. Oh no, whatever will they do?
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Soviet Union annexed Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and parts of Romania. In the West, the fighting over the English Channel continued, and Adolf Hitler set September 15th as the date for the German invasion of Britain. But another invasion is beginning right now, as I said, and it's happening in East Africa. On August 4th, the Italians launched an invasion of British Somaliland from Abyssinia, which they have controlled the last few years. This is to be a quick, spectacular, and strategic victory, and will be useful both militarily and for
La nostra offensiva in Africa.
propaganda purposes. The Italians have 350,000 troops in Abyssinia, 70% of them native. The British in all of East Africa have fewer than 25,000 and just 4 battalions in Somaliland. Italy allots many times that for the invasion force with huge artillery superiority.
Okay, so not bad planning by the Italians, right? You're invading, so your enemy's on the defensive. You always need more men than the defenders. Good job, Italy. Basic understanding of warfare right there. Good job, good job. You're making progress.
There are 3 lines of advance, to Zela in the north, Hargeisa in the center, and Odwena on the right. British Somaliland is the smallest and the most desolate of the British East African possessions, sandy and barren, and with a dangerous coastline. But you know, when the war had broken out, it became a threat to the Italians. I mean, it neighbored French Somaliland and the port and railway at Djibouti, which was the quickest way to Addis Ababa, the Abyssinian capital. But France being defeated and Italy officially joining the war totally turned the tables. The British military contingency plans had rested on working with the French across the border. But now British Somaliland is isolated. Berbera, the capital, is a week from Mombasa by sea, and to get any reinforcements by land from Nairobi, they'd have to go through Italian Somaliland. The British plan, though, is not to reinforce and not to evacuate. They will offer maximum resistance, inflict the greatest losses possible on the enemy, and then attempt to withdraw. So the Italians invade with 25,000 men crossing the border August 4th. Zela and Hargeisa fall within 48 hours. By the end of the week, they are nearing Berbera, where the British and colonial defense forces, such as they are, await them. Now,
the most effective Italian offensive that there will ever be. The Italians will never top this moment.
I imagine some of you are thinking, British Somaliland, East Africa, so what if some guys are fighting there? That doesn't make any difference to the war, but you are mistaken. You also might think when you look at a map of East and Northeast Africa that the Italian situation there is unfavorable, but that's kind of only on a map. In the years since Italy took over Abyssinia in the Second Italo-Abyssinian War, they have seriously built up their forces in the region. They have those 350,000 men, backed with 400 big guns and 200 aircraft. Some 100,000 of those men available on the border of Anglo-Egyptian Sudan alone. And in general, everywhere, they have easy avenues of approach. The British had the Sudan Defense Force on that border, 4,500 men for 1,200 miles of border. Why am I now talking about Sudan? Because that is the key to the whole region, and this is the real beginning of the whole Italian East Africa campaign. Yes, last month the Italians attacked Kassala and Galabat, but this is the real beginning of an offensive to try and take an entire British colony, weakening their enemy and having a major PR opportunity. I mean, conquering a British colony? That never happens. The Italians
Facts.
have odds of 10 to 1 in their favor overall here. And if they
Oh god, and they're gonna fail. This is just retroactive because we know the outcome, right? We know the spoilers for this series here. We know that Italy does not succeed in any of that. And they have these odds. That's embarrassing.
they take Somaliland, and then after that Sudan, to paraphrase the Abyssinian campaigns from the British Ministry of Information, the supply lines to the Middle East, up the Red Sea, and across all of Africa from Takoradi to Khartoum would go too. Egypt itself would become untenable. There could not, in fact, be any front in the Middle East. It would all go. And what about all the oil in the Middle East? How would you get that? And think what losing the Red Sea would do to sabotage British trade and communications when they most need those lines open. Transport from India, Australia, or New Zealand would be lengthened by weeks, if not months, and that could decide the war. The wasp waist of the British Empire would be severed by pincers. Rodolfo Graziano's
I like that sentence. That's a nice sentence.
pincer advancing from Libya, and the other pincer coming from Italian East Africa. It is really not surprising that Mussolini, that radical opportunist adventurer, should have thought that the collapse of France gave him the chance to become a new pharaoh. He's not the only one dreaming of ever more conquest. Something I did not mention last week when talking about Hitler's plans for the USSR. On July 31st, he told his generals Brauchitsch and Halde that the decision he'd made in June, as the French campaign was ending, to demobilize 35 divisions so the manpower could be used to help his economic war against Britain was going to be reversed, and he would instead increase the army to 180 divisions, with panzer divisions doubling from 10 to 20. He was also planning on speeding up the transfer of forces to the east, and by spring 1941, we'll have 120 divisions not too far from the Soviet Union's borders. Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff of German Armed Forces High Command, tells the Chief of Planning of the German Army Staff, Colonel Walter Warlimont, about the plans to attack Russia. Warlimont is against this because it is the same two-front war that Germany lost in 1918. But Jodl tells him it's not up for discussion, it's Hitler's decision. Hitler has long wanted to conquer the USSR, in spite of the obvious dangers of any sort of offensive action. The power centers of the USSR are remote, and the Soviets have those two enormous advantages: endless men and endless space.
Yeah.
But just now, Hitler is alarmed. Since last September, the USSR has taken over 286,000 square miles of territory in Poland, the Baltics, and Romania, inhabited by some 20 million people. Although the Soviet claim to this territory had been agreed to by Germany before the war in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, all that acquisition can be sort of seen as threatening. Not that Hitler thinks the Soviets will attack him. He does not. But the boundary changes in Eastern Europe over the past 11 months give the USSR a greater opportunity for continued expansion, while at the same time limiting Germany's opportunity. Finland is still threatened by the Soviets, as is now Bulgaria. The Soviets now control a big chunk of the Baltic Sea. So yeah, Hitler is alarmed. It was the evidence these forward moves gave of Russia's determination to pursue its own advantage in the teeth of Germany's proven military power that persuaded Hitler he could not defer a test of strength with her forever. And if so, it must be sooner rather than later. You know what? This reminds me of when I covered the beginning of the Great War and talked about Germany's then Chief of Staff Helmut von Moltke saying, better a winnable war with Russia in 1914 than one they could not win in 1917. Same sort of thinking. Back in May, German intel had reported that the Soviet Red Army could raise 200 divisions, but that it was so disorganized after the military purge of 1938 that it would take years, if not decades, for it to regain its former strength. Hitler is willing to set his 120 Eastern divisions against those 200. The intel that they reported on Soviet arms production, however, was faulty. They reported around 10,000 Soviet tanks to Germany's 3,500. That's around a 3-to-1 advantage, and yeah, Hitler's willing to take those odds. However, the Soviet tank fleet is actually around 24,000.
Oh.
That makes it 7-to-1. Hitler is not aware of this. Well, this week on the 5th, the first operational plans for an invasion of the USSR are given to Halder by one of his officers, General Erich Marx. It's for a two-pronged attack, with the main one through the Baltics and a smaller one towards Kiev. When they link up, another operation will head to the Baku oil fields. The advance line is Archangel, Gorky, Rostov, and the plan now calls for 147 divisions to attack. The first objectives are cities Leningrad, Moscow, and Kiev, and there will be 44 reserve divisions. The keys to victory are to be surprise and speed. Marx thinks the operation will take from 9 to 17 weeks to finish.
Does he know how big that land is, right? Like, I know he's looking at a map, but surely there's numbers on that map that tell him the distance. Oh my God.
Varlamont is tasked the 8th with preparing the deployment zones in East Prussia and occupied Poland. The most important thing of all is that Stalin must not suspect what they're planning. They must lead him to believe that the troops were simply being moved out of range of British bombers. But there's still the fighting for Britain to deal with right now. German Grand Admiral Erich Raeder aired his preference last week for postponing Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, until May 1941. By then, Germany would have the two gigantic new battleships Bismarck and Tirpitz bolstering the Navy. There would also be loads of new smaller ships. Hitler couldn't really argue with that line of reasoning, but said no, the operation would still kick off September 15th if the week-long preliminary bombing barrage had done serious damage to the Royal Navy. Otherwise, it would be postponed to 1941. Well, at the end of last week, a big group of Canadian soldiers arrived in Britain, including several Americans who had volunteered. As this week begins, a bunch of Australian soldiers arrive, which would be a different story if the Italians controlled the Red Sea. And soon after that, pilots and aircrew from southern Rhodesia. So by September, there will be a lot more fighting men in Britain. As for the active war, from August 1st through August 10th, there are Luftwaffe attacks on Allied shipping each day. The heaviest fighting is the 8th, when the Germans lose 31 planes and the RAF 20. But overall, it's worse for the Germans, 62 to 27. Operation Adler, Eagle, the next phase of the Battle of Britain, which I detailed last week, is postponed until next week because of inclement weather the 5th. Still, on the 9th, 300 German planes fly over the Channel coast and southeast England, targeting the radar stations at Weymouth and Portland Bill. British fighters sent out to get them shoot down 18. And that is the week, with Hitler planning for an invasion nearly a year away, even as the Italians begin one right now. In a far-off corner of the globe that no one much in Europe has ever really thought about or even really heard of, and yet it is still of major importance, and this illustrates the nature of this conflict. Here in 1940, the world is interconnected, and the events on one continent have major repercussions on other continents and can decide the war. Make no mistake, modern war is global war.
Yay.
To learn more about how the Middle East got to where it was now in 1940, click here for our Between Two Wars episode.
And that was week 50. Haile Mussolini, Haile Selassie's Usurper, War in Somaliland, August 10th, 1940. This was another week where there really isn't much to discuss. It is just things happening, and they happen. Well, I guess there could be talk on whether or not the Italian stuff, but I mean, it's just, for now, until the Italians really start the offensive, it's just there. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.